All right, we're live.
We're live. Yay!
Happy Hatch Day.
Happy Hatch Day, everyone. It's been a pretty exciting day so far. We have had 2 eggs hatched. One hatched. What time did it hatch yesterday?
It hatched yesterday, early in the morning.
Like
we saw the pip very early in the morning.
So yesterday morning, and then the second egg hatched today about 45 minutes ago, an hour ago.
Yeah, well, we saw the first evidence of the bill pipping out and some movement at I think 11:20ish, and I think our second chick made it out just half hour to 45 minutes ago. So good job to those guys for making it right on time to their hatch day party.
Yep. They weren't late. Or one was early.
Yeah.
All right. So as per usual, my name is Sean Peterson. I am I just got my PhD last year in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management at UC Berkeley. And
I'm Lynn Schofield. I'm an ecologist with the Institute for Bird Populations in Petaluma, California. And
we're here to answer all of your questions about peregrine falcons and everything that's going on.
Peregrine falcon questions,
ecology, wildlife, physics.
No physics. My degree is in ecology.
Organic chemistry?
No, closer.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's start it off. First question is, how do you feel Alden is doing as a dad so far?
I'm really impressed with how Alden has been doing. I'm really, I don't know, it's just such an unexpected season, and it's so wonderful that he stepped in. He's been doing a decent amount of incubation, not nearly as much as Grinnell did, but he's taking his turns incubating. He's been regularly delivering food. We've seen, since the chicks hatched, 3 or 4 food deliveries. Smaller prey items than what Grinnell had, traditionally Grinnell hunted pigeons and would bring maybe, 1 in a day. Alden seems to be bringing more food items, but smaller things.
But he also might shift more to pigeons as the chicks get older. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right. So the second egg to hatch, was that the second egg that was laid? We're not 100% sure on the order of hatch. It's a little hard to keep them straight. But the third egg that was laid was the darkest egg, and that appeared to be the second egg to hatch. So this egg that just hatched may have been the last egg laid. We're not 100% sure though.
Yeah, it would make sense with the timing that if this first chick to have hatched was the first egg laid, and it was over 24 hours until the second chick hatched, it wouldn't surprise me that what we've seen is the first and last eggs hatch, and the second egg is either was slow developing for some reason or hasn't developed at all for some reason. So we'll wait to see. We don't really know. It was a little hard to tell all the eggs apart this year, but I believe what we've seen hatch is the first and third eggs, which would imply, if that is the case, it means one egg is definitely Grinnell's. And one was, one of the chicks would be either Alden's or Grinnell's, and we don't know.
Yeah. Let's see. I think there's a question here. Let's see. Well, I think Alden is a bit of a panicked first dad, kind of waiting at the door with the keys going, do you need me to get anything? Ice cream, food? I'll go real quick. It's okay, please. He's definitely been doing a lot of hunting and helping keep the stores well stocked for Annie, but seems very hesitant to be around the chicks. We actually also saw this a little bit with Grinnell.
This was a behavior typical of Grinnell as well. I think Annie, when the chicks first hatch,
she's very protective of the chicks when they first hatch. So I think one of the things that we're seeing is kind of her kind of slightly excluding them a little bit.
But yeah, I would agree that Alden does seem to have a certain he has a little bit less confidence when it comes to going in and trying to incubate with the chicks there than Grinnell did. So that might mean that he is new to this, or it might just mean that, this is a new mate and a new territory.
He's still kind of learning his how he relates to Annie and her and the chicks. So he's great that we see him trying and working on it. But it is kind of hilarious to watch him try to incubate. All right. Are peregrine falcons at high risk for avian flu? Yes and no. So yes, they are, because they hunt birds and therefore are exposed to a lot of bird pathogens. With the avian flu, raptors have been hit really hard. A lot of them that hunt ducks, especially. In the no side is that they are not very social birds, so that they aren't really around other individuals to be spreading it. So they would be getting it from prey rather than from other birds they're interacting with, which is what people are worried about with bird feeders or flocking birds like ducks and chickens and that kind of stuff. That said, this current strain of highly contagious avian flu has not jumped across the Rocky Mountains yet. So the Cal falcons and the Bay Area falcons are not at risk for this current strain.
Yeah, at least so far, and hopefully that continues to be the case. I also know that peregrine falcons, they are somewhat more tolerant to diseases from other birds because that's what they hunt. Of course, as far as this strain of avian flu goes, who knows, because it's a novel form of it. But, they're going to be exposed to it more from their prey, but they also are a little bit more evolved to interact with pathogens from avian prey. Let's see. Here's a good question. So juvenile falcons, and we've definitely seen, our more than our fair share of juvenile female falcons checking out the Campanile in these last few months. And we know males that have been stopping by are juveniles because they have brown feathers rather than the slaty gray. And that's just typical of peregrine falcons. The first set of feathers they grow are brown. And yes, camouflage is definitely one of the reasons for it, for sure. A juvenile bird is really not figured out a lot of things about its life yet. So anything that can give it even a little bit of an edge helps, because although another bird is unlikely probably to catch a full-grown peregrine falcon, a juvenile falcon is at risk of being predated by owls or crows or ravens. But another reason as well is that birds need to be full size when they move out of the nest, because they need to be able to fly when they're ready to leave the nest. Ducklings aside, when we're talking about altricial birds, so ones that, precocial is the ducklings.
Right. I know altricial.
Talking about the altricial. Anyways, the altricial ones, they need to be fully grown and ready to fly when they need to leave the nest. And so that means they need a fully grown set of feathers. And that's actually really fast time period to grow the feathers in. So they're going to grow what is sort of the easiest feathers to grow. And I think the brown pigmentation is kind of within the easiest feathers to grow category.
Yeah. And one other kind of interesting little feather tidbit is that they also are trying to grow the strongest feather that they can. And melanin, which is the brown coloration, the brown pigment, it helps strengthen feathers. So you'll often see a lot of birds have like black or brown wingtips. And that's because they want the tips of those feathers to be as strong as possible. So that's another reason why they go with the brown coloration.
All right. So here's a good question. Did Annie help chick number 1 out of the egg? And it's a little bit hard to tell because, you don't get to see fully what's going on right during hatching, since Annie's really covering up the chicks a lot. But yes, that is, they will help once the chicks have been able to make the pip hole and are part of the way out. They will help removing pieces of the eggshell. And so she likely did that with chick 1. The other thing that you kind of see her do, and we definitely saw an awful lot of the night before the first egg hatched, is she was moving around a lot and looking down. And that was her gently making little vocalizations to the chicks who, if you're close enough, you can hear them peeping back. We obviously can't hear that from our webcams, but
yeah, the chick movements in the egg are encouraged by parental vocalization. So she talks to the chicks as they're hatching and encourages them as they hatch. So that is one major thing that they do to help.
Yeah, and Annie, she can't do anything to initiate the first hole in the pip. That has to start from the inside. And so the chick has to do most of the work, but once the egg's mostly cracked, she will move pieces out of the way for the young.
All right, do the chicks start breathing once they hatch, or can they breathe when they are in the egg? So most of the development, they are not breathing air. They are getting all their nutrients and requirements from the egg yolk and the egg white, the albumin. As they get really old, there forms a little air gap at the top of the egg, kind of separated by a membrane. And then the chick will pierce that membrane, and they can breathe the little kind of chunk of air that's in the egg. But then they have to very quickly continue working and get through that eggshell, and that's what the pip is that first little breathing hole. So they do start breathing when they pierce that first air bubble, but they very quickly after that have to break out of the rest of the egg, or at least create a little hole in the egg.
Okay, so why is Annie eating so many rocks? Does she need that many rocks?
She kind of does. So birds don't have teeth. So that's one of the characteristics that defines a bird. And they, rather than having teeth, what they have is a very muscular pouch right in their neck called the crop. And this is full. They eat rocks to kind of store in that pouch the crop, and then they crush things with the muscular pouch, and it kind of acts as teeth. So the little rocks break off all the meat from the bone and break up the bones, and really kind of act as a way to chew their food before it gets to the stomach. So yeah, they are really do need the rocks to aid in digestion, and that's they'll kind of spit them up over time and get new ones. So yeah.
All right, so let's see. So your little trackpad has
my computer
issues.
has issues.
All right, but I'll just ask the question that I can see. Do we know how old Alden is?
We only have a little bit of information about that. We know that when we saw him this year, he was in full adult plumage. So at the very least, he was hatched in 2020. He was not hatched in 2021. That's all we know. So we know he's at least 2 years old in humans terms. It's counted a little differently for birds, but yeah, that's kind of all we know.
Yep.
We think he's probably younger than Annie, but he might have had a different territory and lost that territory and moved on to this one. So it's possible that he's older than we think.
Yeah, all we really have to go on is the speculation that he seems a little less confident when it comes to incubating. So maybe hasn't had a nest before, but that's just speculation.
All right, this is the hardest question we've ever had. The chicks are so cute.
I know. They're so
cute.
So cute.
It's so cute. Thank you for that question.
Yes. Let's see. So there's kind of a little discussion going on in chat, and it's, how do we know whose chick is which? And the answer is we're pretty confident 2 are Grinnells because they were laid before Grinnell passed, and they're was no sign that in that immediate time before Grinnell's passing, Annie was up to other things in that immediate time. The third egg could be either. It was laid, a day and a half after Grinnell died, a little more. So it could be either Alden's or Grinnell's. And we can't know without maybe a comparison of genetic material. We are considering doing that. There's been discussion even prior to our, general interest about who the father is of these chicks, doing a larger Bay Area wide study, looking at the interrelation between Bay Area peregrine falcons. And so we could, incidentally also find out who's the biological father of these chicks.
But to get the DNA sample, we actually just pull a feather. The most of the feather that you see is made of keratin, so it's the same as your fingernails and hair, and it doesn't have any DNA in it. But the feather root, similar to the root of your hair, has DNA associated with it, so you can get DNA from the root of the feather.
And the overall Bay Area, California-wide falcon tracking and banding projects have been collecting feathers from chicks in nests all across the Bay Area for many, many years. Initially as part of a study of heavy metal toxicity in birds, but we also could use those feathers to look at, previous chicks from previous nests.
This is a question I do not know the answer to, and I don't know if you do. Why do falcons have dark eyes while other raptors often have visible irises? And, like the Cooper's hawk has this really beautiful blood red eye, and younger ones have yellow eyes. Do you know why irises are different colors?
I can put forth a hypothesis.
Let's hear the hypothesis.
So I do know that the facial markings of peregrine falcons is partially related to helping reduce kind of the sun glare with the dark pigment kind of absorbing that.
Same as eye black for a
football player. Yeah. So it could be that, most falcons are adapted to hunting in wide open areas, and for the peregrine falcons, they're adapted to hunting very high up, and so maybe they're dealing with more glare than other species. Although, of course, it's worth noting not every single feature that a species has is necessarily a specific adaptation to something. It could just be falcons have dark eyes because, incidentally, that's, how they turned out in their line of evolution.
How long does the product of a mating last in the female? Like, how many eggs can she fertilize, or how many days can it last? So this is an interesting characteristic of birds in that the female bird can store sperm inside of her reproductive tract to fertilize eggs. And this is data that's really hard to gather. Basically, it's from incidental observations in captive birds where we know exactly when the birds mated, and then we know when the eggs were laid. So the estimate for most birds is that roughly 2 weeks is what how long a female can store sperm inside her reproductive tract and still produce a viable egg. There's been a couple of instances where it's been up to 40 days in some like turkeys where they know exactly when the turkey mated, and then 40 days later it laid a viable egg. So that's pretty crazy though. But it's really hard to know species specific exactly how long it could last, but roughly 2 weeks is generally what's reported.
Can't turkeys also, though, produce young parthenogenically?
Oh, that could be. Maybe that's what happened.
Yeah, so turkeys have been recorded to lay eggs, viable eggs, without mating at all, and it's just the genetic material of the female alone. So that's all. Fun fact, turkeys can be parthenogenic, which means
they
can essentially, the female can clone themselves in certain rare circumstances.
And they just had the first condor do that recently.
Oh yeah,
which was really
so who
interesting.
knows? Annie could.
These could be just Annies.
For all we know, we'll do this genetic study and find out there's parthenogenic falcons out there.
And so here's the really interesting thing about self-cloned birds is that if a female lays an egg and that's a clone of herself, it actually is a male, because in birds the chromosomes that determine sex are flipped compared to mammals. So she would be giving two Z chromosomes, or she has two Z chromosomes and would be a bird that has, let's see, I'm messing this up.
If you have two of the same in a bird, it's the opposite of human.
Right.
So
okay.
It's a male.
So it's a male. Right. So yeah. Okay.
As we go on our totally
total
divergent tangent here, what were we talking about?
I don't know. All right, next question. Is the surrounding environment more calm now than before? Are there any other falcons flying around? We have seen one other falcon occasionally over the past couple of weeks, who we think is their neighbor from the nest nearby that failed, but he never stuck around very long, and it's otherwise been very peaceful.
Yeah, hopefully we've gotten to a part of the season where most of the falcons have,
settled,
picked a place to spend their season.
And I don't mean settled like as in like you settle on like a subpar mate or something, but like just settled on a territory, decided where they want to be.
I mean, maybe.
Or maybe settled for a subpar mate. Let's see. Okay. Oh, let's do the nest one. Hello. Right. I was wondering why the nest is made on gravel rather than some other material. I'm sure there's a reason, but I had also wondered if it is potentially rough for the eggs or chicks. We should ask Mary if we should do like memory foam for the next nest. No, so we when we create the nest structure, we try to have as close to a natural nest structure as we can, and really the peregrine falcons are nesting on cliff faces in these like just kind of on a little ledge on a cliff. So that's really what they're looking for. If you had a nest that was different than this, that maybe had a different material, they probably wouldn't use it, to be honest. So we're kind of making what they are looking for. It is maybe a little rough on the eggs or chicks, and maybe they risk breaking the eggs a little bit, but I think for the most part, it's a pretty successful situation for the birds.
All right, let's see. Here I'll so we're using kind of the more layman's terms when we talk about the falcons, using chicks and the male falcon, just calling him the male, but the more specific terms, a falcon chick would be referred to as an eyas, and a male falcon is referred to as a tercel. And technically, the word falcon, if you're in falconry circles, specifically refers to the female. But we're kind of opting for the more intuitive language because we're not going to assume everybody here has been a falcon follower long enough to know all the terminology, but thanks for bringing it up because those are kind of fun words to know. Fun fact about the word tercel, it means third, because a tercel is about a third less the size of a female falcon. So
what are some things that we as humans can do for peregrine falcons and other birds we like to watch?
I mean, this is one of those questions that it can go from, very small actions can make a big difference to, you can make even very huge actions. And I'm going to start with just some of the very small actions. one of the largest sources of mortality for birds generally is window collisions. So birds just hitting windows in buildings, tall buildings in the city are often the biggest hazards, but I'm sure everybody has had some instance where they've seen a bird hit a window in a house. And so that issue can be mediated, though, when it comes to, your own sliding glass door. You can put little stickers on. What I like to do is I use some washable paints and let my son paint some designs on the window, and that works great. And we haven't had any window kills here.
Another thing to mention about windows is if you think on a larger scale, some cities like Toronto has done this, are instituting lights out programs where, especially during migration, they try to turn the lights off on all tall buildings at night because those can really confuse migrating birds and cause a lot of death. So something, if you are in a city that has a lot of tall buildings, is encouraging a lights out program during bird migration.
Yeah. Another thing that's a big cause of bird mortality, and this one's a little bit harder for people to implement depending on their situation, but domestic cats are one of the very highest causes of bird mortality. And so if you're able to, keep your cat as an indoor cat. That is the ideal. If you're not able to, because I know sometimes that's just not a possibility for pets that have already become accustomed to that. Try to, do something that makes it more difficult for them to prey on birds. So a bell, or I've, kind of heard them more of like a scrunchie as a collar, which makes them a little bit brighter, a little more obvious, and a little less able to grab and hold on to birds. So that's another little thing to do that, really helps. And then, there's just a lot of, big picture stuff when it comes down to it. The biggest dangers, broadly are going to be habitat loss, are going to be changes in the environment. And, that kind of stuff is a lot more higher level advocacy for, policies that, limit, development in certain kinds of habitats, that, limit, creation of greenhouse gases. But
even in your yard, you could plant native plants is a huge one, because that provides that insect presence that is kind of the very base of the food chain that kind of then filters all the way up to peregrines. So being able to provide that energy base for birds by planting native plants is great.
This one. So this is a two-parter. One of the parts I actually don't fully know the answer to. So does the adult peregrine, are they able to feel the chick's movement in an egg? And does the egg generate heat on its own at all? Or is it totally dependent on heat from the parent?
They are totally dependent on heat from the parent and also the sun. Sometimes if it gets way too hot, there are some bird species that actually have to stand over their eggs and shade them from the sun rather than incubate them. But they're trying to hit a very specific temperature, and they do that most of the time by providing heat from their own bodies. For feeling movement, I don't know. I assume they probably do. I know they hear the chicks for sure. That's definitely one of the key things, but I don't know if they feel movement.
Yeah, I believe they probably can, since they are, right in the moments, the hours before the chick hatches, they are listening to sounds they're making. They probably can also detect that there's movement inside of the egg, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
We can maybe ask somebody who rears falcons in captivity if they know.
The chicks look squished under Annie. How does she avoid hurting them? She's actually putting most of her weight on her wings and her legs. So she's really kind of more making like a fuzzy tunnel underneath her that the chicks are hiding under.
And it's worth noting that she's birds are a lot lighter than they look. Annie probably weighs 1.5 pounds,
Mm-hmm.
give or take.
Yeah.
So she's not, for the volume she takes up, her mass is pretty low. So
all right, what are the survival chances in the first year for juveniles? And this is true for pretty much all birds, but also so very true for raptors. It's pretty low. So once they reach independence, they have about it's 40 to 50% chance of surviving the first year. Once they survive the first year, it gets a lot higher. But that first year is really, really hard, especially immediately after they leave their parents' territory and need to learn how to hunt on their own in places that they don't know and know where to find food. So it's fairly low, and it's kind of one of those I don't know, aspects of ecology that there's just not much like you can do about it, and that's why they breed kind of so much and produce so many offspring, is because there's kind of this bottleneck in the first year.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like this kind of, the young juvenile falcons that have been coming onto Annie and Grinnell's territory and, created such havoc and all of this, we do need to keep in mind that this juvenile bird is still within that first very difficult year where, it made it through the first winter. It just started to learn how to hunt. And then that next dangerous portion is looking for its own territory. So, those juvenile birds that we've been seeing on the territory, they're just trying to get by too, and they're in the hardest year of their life. So yeah, can't blame those birds for the havoc they've caused.
This is our favorite question because we're going to try to coin a new scientific term. What is the word for the side-to-side rocking movement they do when sitting on the eggs and chicks? It's wonderful. And we, as ornithologists, professional ornithologists, have decided that we can scientifically define that movement as enfluffling. That is spelled enfluffling. Enfluffling.
All right. So does Alden need to be incubating more if we're going to see all the chicks survive, or can Annie do it all?
So in the past, we've actually seen Annie really, really do the lion's share of incubation, even after the chicks hatch. So by about day 10, they're going to reach the point where they can thermoregulate on their own and won't need to be cared for quite so much. But Annie really can kind of do most of it. Alden will hopefully take a crack at it more. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, Annie kind of is in the driver's seat for what she needs Alden to do.
Yeah, but even though Alden, with the eggs and probably with the chicks as well, does incubate less than Grinnell does, it varies widely between peregrine falcon pairs how they sort of divide what they do. And so Annie honestly doesn't need Alden to do really very much incubation at all, as long as she has enough time to step away and eat, and as long as he's bringing food for her to eat during those little stretches. So they are doing just fine the way they are. Let's see. Someone's asking about the hoodies. Do you know answers to these things? Okay. Sean knows the answers to these things.
There's this year's hoodie, which was designed by Lauren Helton from scientist at Institute for Bird Populations, depicts Annie and Grinnell. And they are available on our website, calfalcons.berkeley.edu. Yes, I talked to Custom Inc. about shipping internationally, and they said Australia, they gave me an estimate of around $16 was the shipping fee, so a little bit more expensive to ship, but they should be available. So if you want to buy it and ship it to Australia, you are more than welcome. We'd love to have the support.
Yep, and the funds from this current round of T-shirt sales are going to the Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group. They're the ones who've been doing the raptor banding and the peregrine falcon nest monitoring across the Bay Area. So that's where the funding is going right now. So yeah. Well, let's see. So here's a question that's just coming up a lot. Does Alden know these chicks aren't necessarily his offspring? Is that playing a role in his being hesitant around the chicks? And this is hard to answer because, of course, we can't get into the mind, of another animal. But 2 of the eggs were laid prior to Alden's arrival. And Alden had been hanging around this territory for a little while prior to everything happening and him ending up with Annie. So he probably is aware that these chicks aren't his. He probably is aware that, it's possible none of the chicks are his. But is that affecting his parenting? Probably not to any great extent. I mean, because even if these chicks,
we're about to get some food delivery on screen.
Oh, a prey delivery is coming. There it is. Yeah. See, Alden.
Yep,
Alden brought dinner. See, he's parenting great. I mean, because Alden. Peregrine falcons want to maintain a territory long term, and they want to maintain a bond with a mate long term. And so, if he wants to stay with Annie, he's going to have to prove he's, going to be a good father. Whether or not this clutch of eggs are his, it's still a good, decision for him if he wants to be with Annie.
Let's see.
All right, we're gonna skip around a bit so we don't get totally backed up. Yeah.
Let's see. All right. Since the peregrine population went up for the past few decades, do we see any effect of that on the ecosystem of the Bay Area? For example, our pigeon population is a little more under control, with the peregrine populations a lot higher. Go ahead.
Oh.
I don't know if I have a real answer. I mean, peregrines are an apex predator, and so they do have a really huge effect on ecosystems. That said, there's 70 to 100 peregrines in the Bay Area, and I don't know how much of an effect they have on the overall population
of millions of pigeons.
Yeah.
So I think kind of their relative effect of the increase in peregrine falcon population size is probably not enough to create a big difference in the particular urban ecosystem that they're in, which has kind of a enormously high population of pigeons, which is one of their preferred prey, although Alden has been going after a lot more smaller native birds. But even so, on I think kind of the larger scale, there's still not enough peregrines to be making huge ecological changes.
That said, ecosystems are vastly healthier when they have natural predation within them. So it's a sign of a really good, healthy ecosystem to have species like peregrine falcons as part of it.
Yeah, which sometimes the effect of having a healthy population of predators isn't a direct linear effect of the predators, removing, a certain number of other species, but it also has to do with just how other species relate to their environment. Kind of a big example that is used a lot is that when wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone National Park, all of a sudden, a lot of the depredation of willows and other riparian plant species by things like deer and elk went down. And, it was a little bit confusing because there were not enough wolves to be eating so many deer and elk that they'd no longer be browsing, this food. But what it is that deer and elk were being much more vigilant, and so are spending less time kind of in these obvious places near riparian areas. So it actually created big differences in the ecosystem, but not through the direct predation, but because species were changing their behavior in response to a predator being there. So is anything like that happening with the peregrine falcons? I have no idea, but it very well could be.
All right. Any idea on what might have caused Alden's injury? Perhaps a fight with another falcon, maybe hunting? At this point, we don't know. We think it's a very old injury. He's had it ever since we first saw him in February. He appears to get along or get by on it very well. So, we think he's learned to live with the injury. I don't know. It could have been anything, really. I mean, it could have even been a congenital problem that he's had since birth. Is a possibility. But yeah, so we just unfortunately can't speculate.
So did we see what kind of prey item
was
brought in? Annie conveniently always has back to the open side of the nest box.
Yeah, doesn't she know we need to entertain people?
Let's see. I've just gotten this a couple times. So was an autopsy done on Grinnell? We were hoping that we were going to be able to get a little more information about what might have happened to Grinnell prior to getting struck by a car. But we just, his body was not in a condition where we were able to find out. So.
Yeah. I'm not sure if the chicks eventually get named, but if so, I'm hoping one will be called Grinnell Jr. Yes, the chicks are going to be named. I'm going to try not to influence the vote too much, but the typical method we use to name the chicks is have everyone submit suggestions and what they think the chicks should be named. And then we kind of have compiled the finalists from what the most popular suggestions are. And then there's a final vote, and then that's the name of the chicks. And we start that immediately after banding happens.
Yeah, I will say, though, it does sound like Grinnell Jr. is a popular name suggestion right here.
So in all likelihood, we probably will have at least one Grinnell Jr., maybe 2 or 3. Who knows?
Grinnell Jr.'s 1 through 3, which I guess, when do you think the third egg will hatch? And it's a bit of a when and if the third egg is going to hatch, because at this point it's been well over 24 hours between the 2 eggs hatching, and usually what happens is the first few eggs will be laid and allowed to go generally unincubated for a period of time until the last egg is laid. And then they start incubating fully starting at that point. And so most of the eggs hatch at about the same time because incubation will be started about the same time. So usually it's less than 12 hours between eggs hatching. Now, this year was different because the first 2 eggs were laid kind of a normal interval apart. And then the last egg was laid several days later.
So it's hard to say. We just don't know if the third egg will hatch now. It's looking like potentially that the egg that has not hatched might have been the first or the second egg laid, and maybe a little less likely to hatch. The general window that we'd expect a hatch to happen extends through probably tomorrow morning, afternoon. And then it becomes a lot less likely we would see.
Yeah, so we'll find out. And, having an egg not hatch is, kind of a bummer, but it's worth noting that Annie has never had all of her eggs in a clutch hatch before. And that's just pretty common for that to happen, for there to be some reason that one of the eggs does not hatch. So, you know, we might just have 2 chicks this year, and that is, you know, honestly, absolutely terrific. So, yeah. Let's see.
I think this person right here, you have to keep watching because we want to make sure that the 3rd egg hatches too. So make sure that you just keep watching the cam, and you know, we'll get our 3rd hatch.
Okay, so what's the typical peregrine nest constructed from? Are they comfortable on the rocks? And so I feel like that question came up and then we got distracted by something.
But it's a cliff face. They generally have a cliff that they nest on. And it's just a ledge on a cliff, rocky, often with a little depression for the eggs. But yeah, it's fairly similar to what we have here. Oh, I like this one because a lot of people don't know this, but when falcons look directly at the camera, they look like the killer parrots that they are. And yes, the most recent genetic work has shown that falcons are most closely related to parrots and songbirds. And they are not actually that closely related to hawks, eagles, and other raptors. But you can see a lot of the same characteristics in parrots that you can see in falcons. And so, yeah, killer parrots is a relatively apt description.
Yeah. Okay, so how long do peregrine falcons mate for? And so the answer to this one, you know, people kind of often say that peregrine falcons mate for life, which is often turns out to be true, but a lot of it comes down to peregrine falcons choose and then try to stay on the best territory they're able to find. And so a pair, both individuals want to stay on the same territory, and both individuals want to stay together with another, you know, someone that they've been able to raise chicks with successfully. So they will end up staying together for life because they want to stay together on the same territory if they know that that's been successful. But if for some reason one of the pair gets chased off their territory by another, then they will switch mates at that point.
Plot twist. Grinnell or Alden are not the fathers. Instead, it's a tropical peregrine named Francisco. Unlikely. So there's not been many studies of extra pair paternity, which is what it's called in birds, in peregrine falcons, or in many falcons for that matter. I think there's only been 4 species that they've looked at that, and all 4 species they found somewhere between 0 and 10% extra pair paternity. So it's most common that the mates, the mated pair, are the parents for eggs, which is not true for songbirds. Songbirds, it's very common to have multiple different fathers for a single nest.
Yeah, the word for that is most songbirds are socially monogamous, meaning that they will pair off and raise chicks together, but all those chicks might not necessarily be the father taking care of that nest. But peregrine falcons tend to be on the truly monogamous side more frequently. Let's see.
I like this one.
What do we got?
What is Alden's favorite food?
Oh, yeah. Good question. So Alden definitely does select very different food than Grinnell was from what we've been observing of him. We're not seeing Alden catching as many pigeons. He's catching smaller stuff. And we've also seen Alden been bringing in a lot of shorebirds, so sandpipers and plovers and that kind of thing. So we think Alden spends more time hunting out near the bay rather than in the city. But
All right. Next question is, how long has it been since Alden has been there? Can he be deserting her now in her time of need? No. Actually, while we were doing this Q&A, we got a text that said Alden was circling above the Campanile. And we saw this a lot with Grinnell. The male falcon is going to be spending a lot of time near the tower, but probably not a ton of time on cam. So don't worry if you don't see Alden very much. We know he's doing his job. He's bringing a lot of food for Annie and the chicks. Everything is going great. We probably won't see him nearly as much as we did previously.
Yeah, this comes to the same. So do, male falcons leave after hatching? And it will probably turn out that we'll see less of Alden because he'll be spending more and more time hunting. And that's the same as what happened with Grinnell as well when the chicks were young. But he'll still be around. He'll still be bringing food to Annie, and he will still probably be taking turns incubating here and there. What did I do there? Your trackpad.
I need to send my computer in for repairs. All right. Does someone clean out the nest box during the off season? Yes, it gets really messy, especially if you have multiple chicks running around the top of the tower. We do have someone come up and help clean and make sure, especially that all of the gutters and everything on the Campanile are clear for rain water and that kind of stuff. So yeah, we make sure to keep the tower in tip-top shape.
Okay, so here's a good question, because why was the last egg kind of noticeably darker? Would a different male affect the egg coloring?
It shouldn't.
So the egg is, an egg starts out as, the single cell. So the egg is, mostly made by Annie, other than the sperm that went in it, and then the egg shell is excreted by Annie. So there shouldn't be anything that a different male would be able to change within Annie's physiology.
And the coloration on the shell, that pigment is laid down within Annie's reproductive tract by her, I think it's some glands. I don't really know what the actual structure that lays down the pigment is, but it's something that is Annie's. So it really shouldn't have anything to do with the male.
Yeah. So one reason it might be somewhat darker than the others is that, the pigment is being laid down while the, egg is in her reproductive tract. And if for some reason it is in her reproductive tract a little bit longer, it will be a little bit darker. And given kind of the odd circumstances surrounding the laying of this last egg, she might have been holding on to it a little bit longer than the others. Let's see. So I've seen kind of two related questions. So first of all is, when is the banding? And then there was also someone asking, when are they likely going to take their first flights? And so I think banding has already been scheduled for May 31st.
Not scheduled yet.
Okay.
We're just talking about when it might happen. But yeah, so it's we generally aim for the chicks being about 24 to 26-ish days old. So when they're big enough that they're fully grown, but not so big that they're running around like crazy and may hurt themselves.
Yeah, so the first thing to reach full size on a young peregrine falcon and a young raptor in general is going to be its legs. So that is useful when it comes to banding, because it means that you can apply the band before all the feathers have grown in and you have a bird that you might accidentally cause to fledge before it's ready. So it's a pretty precise window for when they get banded. So sometime end of the month. And so when are they going to be able to fly then?
So they generally fly when they're 38 to 42 days old. And it takes longer for female chicks to fly because they're bigger and they need to grow longer wings and just get generally bigger to get fully grown. So they are usually on the far end of that window, and male chicks are usually on the early side. But so we're expecting first flights to be around the week of June 15th.
Yeah. Okay. So people have kind of been asking. Just there was, a really wonderful and kind memorial that people had sort of organically created after Grinnell's passing. People had brought art and flowers and laid them underneath the Campanile, and kind of after some rain and a big windstorm, everything ended up getting cleaned up. But people were kind of wondering if there'd be some sort of memorial we could do for Grinnell, and are we able to do that? This would be something we'd have to discuss with people where it could go. But what we are at least hoping to do is, because so many people created just wonderful art, is we'd like to feature a lot of that art on our website.
Have kind of a virtual memorial that we have maintained for Grinnell from all the amazing pieces that people made.
Yeah, and so once things have gotten a little bit less chaotic with us, following the chicks on social media, we're going to try to put a shout out to people to try to get some of that art if people would like to have it shared. So.
All right. I've only seen Alden bringing in smaller birds. Will he have difficulty providing enough food for all of them? Probably not. He has been hunting smaller birds. We also know that Grinnell generally hunted smaller birds early in the after the chicks hatched in previous years. He might switch to pigeons a little bit later. Annie also, when the chicks get older, will start hunting again, and she'll probably start going after pigeons too. So I don't think he'll have difficulty providing enough food. One thing that's really interesting is that because male falcons are smaller than females, they kind of naturally split up the food that they are going for, the prey that they're going after. And so they're not competing with each other. And they naturally go after smaller prey, and females naturally go after bigger ones.
Yeah. So here's a question we kind of get a lot of. So if they aren't able to bring enough food, are we going to intervene to help provide food? And the answer is kind of unfortunately, but reasonably no. There's a lot of reasons for the no. For one, is just it's interfering with the nest of a wild protected species is prohibited in the first place, because although theoretically bringing up food would be a good thing, it actually might be a kind of disturbance that would dissuade Annie and Alden from remaining on the Campanile. For one, they are not going to accept dead food either, especially not dead food that suspiciously is provided by humans. So for one, we don't really have that option. For two, bringing the chicks into captivity for some reason, none of us have the knowledge or know-how to correctly raise a chick. There's no compelling conservation reason to raise these chicks to, get any of the sort of permitting for it. So for a lot of reasons, it is better to not interfere in their lives like that, because, having a couple of fully adult humans come up and take their chicks, even if those chicks are ones that they can't care for, is going to send a signal to them that this is not a safe place to nest. We wouldn't be able to bring food to them. And then if we tried to raise chicks in captivity, it's very likely that they would end up being imprinted on humans, that they wouldn't end up being free living individuals anyway. So I think I feel pretty confident that they are going to be able to successfully raise these two chicks.
Very confident.
It's worth noting that Annie only laid 3 eggs this year and not the 4 that she usually does.
Mm-hmm.
And she made a choice to lay 3 eggs because that was the number of chicks that she felt that they would be able to care for. So it's, Annie probably has a number of chicks that she thinks she'll be able to care for right now.
What will happen to the 3rd egg if it is not viable? And so Annie, every year that she's laid eggs, has had at least one not hatch. And there's 2 outcomes that we've seen for those non-viable eggs. The first is that a couple of them have been eaten either by the chicks or by the parents. And that's something that is seen relatively common in peregrine nests or other bird nests too. And then the other thing is sometimes they just get ignored and kicked to the side and eventually just kind of fall out of the nest box. So that's probably the most likely results if the 3rd egg is not viable.
All right. So, given peregrines are pretty adaptable, they've adapted to urban environments where there is an abundance of prey, and, skyscrapers kind of provide an abundance of possible nest sites. Will we one day start seeing falcons, with smaller and smaller territories? And it does already seem that peregrine falcons are establishing smaller territories than would historically have been suspected outside of a city environment. There's still kind of a limit on how close peregrine falcons are willing to allow another territory to be, how willing they are to allow other individuals near their territory. So,
I like this question. Where do they store their extra food? Is there an extra pantry somewhere on the Campanile? Yes. So the structure of the Campanile is you have the bell level where all the bells are. Above that, there's a wide, maybe like 2 foot wide ledge around the Campanile below the nest level. And that is often where they store their food, is on this really wide ledge below the nest level. So you can see them kind of hop out of the balcony. And when they do that, they are often just hopping down to this ledge below. And that's where they store their food. When we go up there sometimes for cleaning or for banding or something, we'll peek over the edge and you can see prey stored there.
All right. Okay, so this I feel like is kind of a bit of a deeper question. As ornithologists, what have we learned from Annie, Grinnell, and Alden? And so I'm going to answer this on like kind of a personal level. A lot of the work I do right now kind of revolves around climate change and its impact on wetland species, and also climate change and how forest fires impacts forests. So, that's kind of right now feels like a very hopeless situation. But, the falcons are kind of a reminder that peregrine falcons were almost totally lost from the, lower 48. They were almost gone from most of the United States. But, people working hard helped turn that around. Activism helped stop the really excessive use of agricultural pesticides. Then scientists learned how to kind of breed and raise peregrine falcons in a way that they don't get imprinted, that they can release them back into the environment. So they created an environment where the falcons were able to thrive, and then they, brought the falcons back. So Annie, Grinnell, and Alden have taught me that, stuff that individual people do can make a difference, and then that we get to have these connections. So I don't know, that's what I've learned from them.
Yeah, and I think, this year in particular, what I've really taken away from this is there's so much variation, so much we don't know about these birds. And, when Annie disappeared early in the year and we thought she was gone and then came back, that was something that we don't really see with peregrine falcons. And we don't often see this adoption, this stepfather situation that we're seeing with Alden. And I think it just kind of highlights that there's a lot of things that we still don't know and we're still learning. And it's really cool to be able to kind of be learning this stuff as we experience it live. It's really fun to be able to peek into their lives and see their behaviors and everything that we kind of confirms things that we thought, or just kind of totally is something that we never knew.
Yeah, I mean, Annie and Grinnell and Alden have also taught us, what you kind of know, but you don't always remember as a scientist, that, these individual birds are indeed individuals. They each behave different ways, relative to one another. They have, different preferred prey. They have different, routines that they do. I mean, Alden hunts at night. I mean, he does things in a different way than Grinnell did because they're individuals, You can't make complete generalizations about every individual,
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. These peregrine falcons have a predator that they need to be worried about. So the Campanile is luckily a very safe structure. It is like 300 and some feet tall. So they're really way up there. They don't really have much to worry about in the way of predators. There's not going to be like raccoons that get up to the top of the Campanile. But there are a couple things they need to worry about. The two main ones are great horned owls and crows. Great horned owls are relatively common in the Bay Area. They're on campus pretty frequently. You can find them in Strawberry Creek and other areas. And if they fly up high enough to find the nest, they could definitely be a threat to the chicks and even the adults.
And we have on one occasion seen a great horned owl kind of up from the webcams up by the Campanile. So it's unlikely. There's not a lot of reasons the great horns would be up that high, but we have seen them up, at nest level flying before.
And then crows and ravens are just very much known to be opportunistic nest predators. If they saw the chicks unattended for a period of time and thought they could get away with it, they would definitely eat the chicks. So that's the only other real predation worry. But the parents keep a really good eye on the chicks, especially at this age. So it's not a huge threat. They're both very good at keeping an eye out.
Yeah, the real danger, especially when it comes to the crows and ravens, is when the juveniles are first starting to learn to fly. The crows and ravens will often mob them and make it difficult for them to, start those first flights or land well. And so that can be a big issue. And so someone just is asking, they notice Alden limping, or are they seeing wrong? And so if you haven't been, if you don't know, haven't been constantly glued to the cameras like we happen to be, Alden does have a relatively significant leg injury. So you will see him walking with a limp. We don't really know what the injury is, but we think it's an old injury that healed poorly. So yeah, that's actually one of the easiest ways to know if the bird you're looking at is Alden, because it is a relatively distinctive limp. And when he's in flight, he also hangs that leg kind of low.
All right, so this is, I'm not going to answer the timely part because we're way past when this was asked. But unfortunately, we are really limited in where the camera placement is on the campanile. So really, the nest box location is the only place we can put it. So we can't adjust where it is to get a different angle. So unfortunately, Annie does often feed the chicks with her back to the camera and just kind of blocks it. And that's just something we kind of have to live with.
All right. So does a falcon's territory overlap with other large raptors? And the answer is definitely yes. Although falcon territories are not going to overlap one another's, they do have their territories overlap with other raptors. There is a red-shouldered hawk pair that I know of, the one in the the Memorial Grove near the Life Sciences building, and I know that there's another like further a little bit uphill from the Campanile. So there's two red-shouldered hawk pairs that I know are within Annie and Grinnell's territory.
I think there's a Cooper's hawk, a few Cooper's hawks too.
Mm-hmm. So there's definitely overlap with other large raptors. They are using very different resources. A red-shouldered hawk hunts in sort of denser forest. Peregrine falcon is not very good at navigating through that sort of habitat. So they're not in direct competition, although Annie and Grinnell have been known to predate other raptors. We've seen them bring sharp-shinned hawks into the nest. So, yeah.
Yep, and they do really aggressively exclude raptors from the immediate nest site location. They'll chase off anything that gets close. Let's see.
All right, so some places don't ban the peregrines. They feel it causes undue stress. Do we agree with this? And
this is a really good question because it's something a lot of scientists really grapple with in studies where you're doing any sort of handling of birds or any animal. Because, we as scientists, we want to do a minimal amount of influence on these animals' lives, and causing stress is something that we definitely try to avoid as best we can. It's largely a question of, you can't do pretty much any research except for like strict observational research without having some sort of influence on your study organism. And you need to be able to have some sort of study that justifies what you're doing and provides some sort of benefit to that species that could not be derived from simple observational work. And frankly, we just cannot get the information we want about where peregrine falcons are going, what their survival rate is, and what their movements are without banding those chicks. And that is very important information because that helps us understand where they go and what they need to survive.
Yeah. So the amount of stress being caused with banding the chicks is pretty minimal. It only takes, 15 to 20 minutes total up in the tower typically to band the chicks. And there's pretty valuable information that is gathered. As Sean mentioned, we get information about kind of what their dispersal and distribution is within the Bay Area. But having bans on birds by understanding, how many bands you put out and then how often you are able to redetect bands and what age the birds are when they're redetected, it actually gives you an estimate on what the true population number is. So that's also really important. And the banding studies is also allowing, the feather samples, which is what's permitting scientists to get some information about heavy metal toxicity. And now there's studies on rodenticide loads in raptors and this DNA study we're hoping to conduct. So for the Bay Area peregrine falcons, it's been determined that the costs relatively low. The amount of stress is very minimal because it's a very quick process, and the benefit is pretty high. So yeah, that's the assessment we've made. Let's see. So how long are they going to continue to incubate the last egg before they would give up? Assuming it doesn't hatch. We don't know for sure. We'll find out. But if it doesn't, probably what will happen is they'll still continue incubating the egg along with the chicks. That it will still be in with the chicks. But then as the chicks get older, their movements will kind of cause the egg to roll off to one side or another, or their movements will break it. So once the chicks become mobile is about when they'll stop sitting on the egg, because they're not sitting on the chicks themselves either. Let's see. All right. So did the dentate egg hatch today? And yes, so the egg that hatched today, we had initially thought that it was unfertilized or unviable because it looked like it was dented inwards, not an outward pip. So yeah, we thought that one was not going to hatch. So we were proven wrong, because that's the one that did end up hatching. And that's the one where the second chick is from. So yeah, we were proven wrong. And so hopefully, hopefully that happens all the time, where our pessimism is proven to be wrong. Let's see. All right. So question, what other types of hawks are in the Bay Area? And I might do a little plug here because there are quite a few other species of hawks in the Bay Area, and they use all sorts of different environments. And we're going to do a whole hour-long talk on May 21st, I believe, with the Berkeley Public Library. And it's going to be about the different kinds of raptors of the Bay Area. So in a few days, we'll on social media put a little advert on social media, and we can talk about our resident raptors with the library with everybody. But
there's a follow-up on this. Are there other type of falcons in the Bay Area, and where would they be found?
Other types of falcons. So that does narrow it down a little bit. There's still a few other types of falcons. The most common other type that you'll see might be American Kestrels. They're quite a bit smaller than a peregrine falcon.
I wish they were bigger. That would be.
I know. Yeah. No. They're Kestrels are they're kind of red and with kind of bluish wings for the males. And they tend to hunt smaller prey, things like rodents and insects. And they typically hunt in sort of open areas. They like to have sort of perches that they can sit on and watch. The other kind of falcon that is relatively commonly seen is a merlin, which has coloration very similar to a peregrine falcon, but they're quite a bit smaller, and mostly I see those during migration.
Yeah, I can't really think of many like nesting merlins.
Yeah, so yeah, I don't know exactly where they might be nesting in the Bay Area. Somebody else might have the answer to that, because I know there's a lot of smart birding people around there, but they like many falcons, like more open areas where they can hunt.
How soon after a chick hatched is it ready to eat food? So chicks can survive on their kind of what they still have from the yolk of the egg for about 24 hours. And that's but the window on when they can start eating, probably within a few hours. I think we usually see within the first 4 hours, we see them feed the chicks. But they can last a lot longer.
Yeah. So, this is kind of in the same vein as, a couple others. Would we help the chicks if something went wrong? Is there any plan to try to treat Alden's injury? And this one's another, unfortunately, no, for quite a few reasons. And, just logistically, Alden is a, otherwise very healthy adult peregrine falcon. There's no reasonable way that we could expect to catch Alden in the first place. And probably the amount of stress that would go into it would, not be particularly useful. And then the other thing is Alden, we believe it's an old injury that healed poorly. I don't think it is an injury that could be treated very effectively. So no, there's no plan to make that particular intervention. We just wouldn't be able to do it.
Have there been any updates on Annie and Grinnell's daughter on Alcatraz? For those of you who don't know, Laurentium, who is Annie and Grinnell's daughter from 2018, was established a territory on Alcatraz and has had 2 successful breeding seasons so far, and this would be her third. Last we heard, she was nesting again. I don't think we've had any details or reports from Alcatraz. We'll have to reach out to them and kind of get an update. Her nest is really hard to access and can't be seen from the public at all, except maybe by boat you could see it. But I think it's really hard to get any information on and monitor it. So, but we'll have to ask the rangers at Alcatraz and see if they have any details.
Yeah. We just the rangers give us the occasional update. So last we heard, she's still there and still looks like nesting is happening. So we can we'll ask and see if someone has an update. Occasionally in these Q&As, it turns out one of the people on Alcatraz is actually present and has the update for us. So we'll find out. All right. So where do Annie and her mate live in the off season?
So many peregrine falcons migrate very long distances. The word peregrine actually means wanderer. And that's what they were known for doing, is flying really long distances and moving around a lot. Annie and Grinnell Annie and Alden, do not.
We don't know about Alden. Annie and Grinnell.
Annie and Grinnell they were homebodies. They stayed very close to the Campanile all year round. But Alden, we don't know yet. He may migrate. He may not. The Bay Area is wonderful peregrine habitat and wonderful conditions, good weather. So they probably will stick around.
Yeah. Odds are Alden will also, do what many Bay Area peregrines do, which is to stick around all year, since there's good weather and abundant food all year. But we don't know that for sure with Alden. We'll have to find out. Let's see. So when will we know the sex of the chicks?
When they're banded. So that's about 24 days after they hatch. At that point, their legs will be fully grown, and we will know whether they are male legs or female legs.
Yeah, so it's worth noting that this is true of many raptors, and it's very true of peregrine falcons that they are sexually dimorphic is the term. So the males and the females differ, and the difference is entirely in size. Females are quite a bit larger than the males, so from a few measurements, you can pretty well be sure if the chick is a male or a female. There's always the occasional outlier where you have a very small female or a very large male, but the measurements we take, there's a 95% chance, I think, that the sex is what we think it is from the measurements.
All right. When do they start growing their feathers? Well, they have already started growing their down feathers, and that's the most important feathers for the chicks to grow, because that's what helps them stay warm. And that's kind of one of the biggest threats for growing chicks is getting cold and dying. They start growing their body feathers, what are called the contour feathers, and their flight feathers starting at about day 10. That's when you'll see these little feathers called pin feathers that look like these little tubes forming, especially on their wings and tail. And that's kind of the start of their feather development, is around day 10.
All right, let's see. Let's see. Do Annie and Alden ever bring back mammals? And the answer is once. Once. We've one time seen them. They had brought a rat back to the nest. It's very, very uncommon for peregrines to hunt mammals. Typically, because the peregrine falcon hunting strategy is to bomb down at 200 and something miles per hour onto an unsuspecting bird. So if you're trying to hunt mammals, you're not able to use that, primary hunting strategy because you can't go 200 miles per hour towards the ground. So typically peregrine falcons won't do it. As we kind of mentioned before, hang on, sorry. Anyways, yeah, it's not the best strategy for a peregrine falcon. As I mentioned, they're all individuals. They do learn to do different things, but very few peregrine falcons hunt mammals.
All right, so this is a follow-up question to something we talked about earlier. Can falcons actually control how many eggs they lay? How would that work? Yes, they can. The overwhelming evidence in birds is that they decide how many eggs they lay based on environmental conditions, the status of their nest, the abundance of food, and many other things that they factor into their decision about breeding. There are some birds that skip breeding for entire years because the factors are not conducive to having chicks. It only takes them about 2 days to grow an egg from a single cell ovum all the way up and add all the layers of the egg. So they can kind of make these decisions on the fly. And what we think we saw with Annie was her kind of making this decision about how many eggs that she was going to have based on her partner. And if an egg is in the reproductive tract too long, it can be very dangerous for the bird. I forget what that is called, egg-bound?
Egg-bound.
It's a condition called egg-bound and can result in the parent's death. So she probably had an egg in her the day Grinnell died because she was due to lay an egg that day, but she didn't. And she was looking for him that evening and disappeared for, I think, about 4 hours off the nest that night. And we think that she probably laid that egg somewhere else and abandoned it. We don't know where, and this is just kind of a hypothesis we have. But then she made a decision to keep that egg, that the fourth egg or third egg that we see today, based on Alden coming in to take up parental duties with her.
Should I answer this big scope question?
Sure.
All right, because this is sort of my area of research. So is climate change a bigger problem to the forest or bad forest management? I thought they're supposed to burn on occasion. And this is one of those very complex issues. Sierra Nevadas and a lot of the Western US, well, all of the US has some history of forest fires. They naturally have forest fires. The Sierra Nevada, usually the period between forest fires, depending on what region you're in, is between 5 and 20 years within the forest. But the thing is that, in that natural cycle, the fires are relatively mixed severity, with most of it being kind of lower severity, ground level fire with not a lot of high severity. And what we're seeing now is just these massive stand destroying fires that, create fires of millions of acres that are all very, very high severity. So yes, there's supposed to be fires. The fires we're seeing, though, are not the kind of fires that they're supposed to be. And it's a combination. Forest management, does play a role because fires weren't allowed to burn as they normally should. But even in places where, thinning and controlled burns have happened, it's still hard to keep up with because the climate is so much drier. And there's a lot of trees that are dying because of a lack of water, and it's weakening them. So both things are bad. Climate change is the bigger and more intractable one. Let's see.
Yeah. Oh, I like that one.
Which one?
How fast can they go?
Oh, yeah.
How fast can falcons go? I'm guessing 240 miles per hour.
That is a very specific and very accurate guess.
Yes, that is the estimate of the falcon's top speed. And that was gathered by someone who flew their plane behind a falconry bird as it dove and tried to follow them and had to pull up before they hit the ground. But they got to the speed of 240 miles per hour in the dive. It's really, really hard to measure the speed of these birds. And especially you don't know when they're trying their hardest. And that's, that's the best we have, knowledge we have is about 240 miles per hour.
All right. So we brought this up about Larry, or Laurentium, aka Larry. But how much do we know about Annie and Grinnell's previous offspring? So we know that there's the one nesting on Alcatraz successfully. And we've also had sightings of another one, Sequoia, which was hatched in 2020, has been seen in the South Bay.
Yep, pretty close to the San Jose airport.
Yeah, so at least 2 of their offspring have been sighted again. So that's pretty successful as far as that goes, that, we found them again. So hopefully they're doing well.
Is Alden's territory the same as Grinnell's territory? Probably not. There's probably variation, especially in where they're hunting. But it's a little hard to know. We don't have, radio telemetry on these birds or anything, and kind of depend on some assumptions about where they're going based on what food they're bringing back. So it's hard to tell. We don't know exactly where the boundaries of all the territories are, but it's probably pretty similar, but probably a lot of variation.
All right. So back to banding. Where are the parents hanging out when banding happens? And the answer is that they are dive bombing us while it happens, trying to scare us away, which actually, if you work fast enough, it gives the parents will have, felt that they have successfully done what they've needed to do, which is to harass the potential predator until it is gone. So yeah, let's see.
If the city of Berkeley were to put gravel nesting structures on some roofs of buildings where pigeons are a nuisance, would another pair of falcons come and nest there? That is certainly a possibility. Generally, the exclusion zone for a peregrine falcon territory, that they're going to prevent other peregrine falcons from, establishing a territory and making a nest, is about a mile in radius, but it's possible that somewhere a little further away from campus, you could establish a new territory with a nest box. They definitely are looking for them, so that could be an opportunity.
All right, so this DNA study we're hoping to conduct, what does that hinge on? Funding, for one, it is a little bit expensive to be able to analyze these samples, but I think one of the things it really hinges on is a scientist with the interest, time, and expertise to do it. So
or grad student.
so if you happen to know somebody in the UC system who has the interest in this kind of research, I don't know, point them in our direction and we can talk. Let's see. Oof. Is it too early to let our guard down this season? And I'm going to say, yeah, I'm feeling really optimistic. We've had 2 chicks hatch. Alden has proven to be a good functioning Annie really well. They're getting food, but there's still just a lot that could happen. There are dangers. There's predation. There might be a problem with food. There could just be, extreme weather of some sort that the chicks aren't able to handle. We don't know yet. I'm feeling optimistic, but cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. I believe Grinnell was banned. What information were you able to specifically get from him because of that identifier? So we know that Grinnell was hatched in 2013 and banded near Martinez, California. And he was first seen in the late 2016, early 2017 with Annie. So he was three years old. And that's what we could get from his parentage. We also were able to get some sightings of him hunting that were reported to us based on his band. And that's most of the info that we got about Grinnell.
A lot of the times the band, what you're learning from the bands is on more of a population level. You're knowing how many birds are surviving, what ages you're seeing birds at, how old the birds are. So it gives you like kind of a broader population health understanding. And I'll just add this because people frequently comment, anybody know where the male is? And although we're not seeing him on the cams, the folks on the ground have been seeing him flying around. And so here's our son, and our Q&A is essentially the length of time we have for these depends on how much patience he has for us to be not paying attention to him. So we'll probably wrap it up pretty soon.
Birthday hat.
Let's see. A quick, does the night cam emit any light? Did the birds care? And the cameras do not emit any light, although there are lights in the Campanile itself. So there is always a little bit of ambient light. People asked, does that bother them? Evidently no, because they chose this as their nest site. And there are plenty of peregrine falcons that nest well above the Arctic Circle. So there's plenty of peregrine falcons out there that are, nesting in places where it's light all day, every day. So
yeah, and sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions. There's a lot of great ones that we missed out. But you are free to send us questions on social media. We'll try to answer as much as we can.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everybody so much. And we'll maybe do another little chat for banding. And there's our cat, strictly indoor cat, to help reduce impact on the local bird population. Thanks everybody. Bye.
Yep, bye.